Just finished the first service, and today we are starting a new series, going to be 6 weeks long, called Tuned In. And the purpose of this series is to help us to understand how God speaks to us and to be able to understand His voice, to know His will for our lives. And so this morning, we just talked about simply the fact that God is speaking to us. And we did a little hearing test. And you can find that online if you in your small group or whatever. You can pull it up where you just check the different frequencies. You can identify all the old people in your group, like me. And I kind of went out, couldn't hear after a few of those things, but all that loud music. But anyway, we talked about how God made us and how He gave us ears to hear sounds, and how language is spoken, how what's coming out of our mouth is just sound waves, and it hits our eardrums, and it's translated through that whole thing we call our ear into words that describe emotion and thoughts, and we are able to have conversation because God made us with the ability to hear one another so that we can have a relationship with one another. And just as important, and probably even more important really, is the fact that God made us with the ability to hear His voice. And sometimes we take it for granted, just like we take our hearing for granted. You know, if all of a sudden you could not hear anything, life would change drastically. But for many people, even a relationship with God is sometimes without any communication. We're not hearing God, or we're not hearing Him clearly. And so we talked about how God wired us to hear His voice. We're going to get into next week more in detail of what that looks like, what that spiritual ability to hear His voice. And we're talking about the heart of listening next week. But God is speaking to us. And here's the thing, there's so many other things, so many other voices in our heads. We're really not, we're not crazy. But anyway, there's so many different things that are coming at us, and so many distractions. And we mentioned a few of them. One is fear. That's a big one. Just holds us back from what God wants us to do. It's speaking constantly, and it's actually a pretty comforting voice because it keeps us in comfortable places. It keeps us really right where sometimes we want to be and we want to stay, but not where God wants us to be. And so we need to identify whether it's fear, whether it's insecurity, whether it's our selfish desires, or unforgiveness, or insecurity, or guilt. All these different things can be voices inside of our head, and makes it difficult for us to hear God's voice. So here's what I want to leave you with this week is, first of all, understand that God is constantly speaking to you. He's not waiting for you to initiate the conversation. He is constantly communicating with you. His vocal cords are not limited to little pieces of flesh in His throat. His vocal cords are all of creation, His word, His Son. I mean, He is speaking to us constantly, and we need to be aware of it and look for it, listen for it. Expect Him to speak to you. Even when you're not initiating it, expect Him to speak to you through a song. Expect Him to speak to you through your spouse, or through a friend, or through a circumstance. Expect it, because He is communicating with you. Why? Because He wants to have a relationship with you. So here's the question. What is it that's the loudest voice in your head? What is the loudest voice in your life? And I want you to take some time and just share it. Talk about it. Talk about how you can silence that voice, how you can begin to hear God's voice, and what can you do? Talk about this. What can you do to hear God's voice clearly? Thanks. Appreciate you coming to small group. Have a great week. God bless you.